This is TWiT.
Tech Break is brought to you by ACI Learning. The training industry's completion rate is barely 30%. ACI Learning blows its competitors away with an over 80% completion rate. TWiT listeners will receive at least 20% off or as much as 65% off an IT Pro Enterprise Solution plan. The discount is based on the size of your team when you fill out the form.
This story is a biggie, especially if you go to the Ars Technica article that we're going to be discussing today. You'll see it has an insane amount of comments, which means people are angry. The gaming industry in upheaval this week with the news that the Unity engine was implementing a new fee structure. And I'll give you three guesses. Pretty divisive is what it is. Kyle Orland wrote about this for Ars and is here for a return visit. It's good to have you back, Kyle.
Hey, thanks. Good to see you, Jason.
Yeah, good to see you too. So before we get into the massive, amount of changes and all the work that you're doing, kind of tracking the legal issues of this story, first of all, what is Unity's pricing structure now? Because it's easy to think that like the change happens immediately. It doesn't happen until the end of the year, but it's coming, right. It's looming, and people are upset about it. What is it prior to the change at this point?
So right now, Unity is proudly the royalty-free game engine, and that's why it's been so popular with a large segment of the game development community. In fact, if you're using the personal version and you're not making, I think, $100,000 a year in revenue, you can get it completely free. You can release your game and not have to pay any other fees, any other percent of revenue or anything. Now, once you start making a little bit of revenue, you have to start paying for the pro or industrial versions of the engine, but that's just a per site license like you would have for any other software where you pay, a few $1,000s and you get full access to the full version of the engine for all your developers. But you still don't have to pay, any percentage of your revenues. You don't have to pay for every sale, a small bit like you do to Steam, for instance. You just get the engine and you use it. And that's why people like it.
And is it kind of alone, or has it been somewhat alone in that regard? Like, has it been kind of the choice for indie developers because of this low to no price structure compared to some of the other competitors out there?
Yeah, big and small developers actually like it because of this. Unreal has, in recent years, introduced a structure where the first $1 million of revenue are royalty free because they want the smaller developers to actually try out Unreal. But after that, you have to pay, I think, 5% of your revenue to Unreal once you have $1 million game. And everyone thinks they're going to have $1 million game. So they're like, I'm not really sure I want to go with Unreal. So a lot of people stick with Unity, especially as students. Since you can get the free educational license, a lot of schools teach Unity and just give all their students Unity to make these projects that aren't going to make money. So why not use a full functioning free engine, essentially?
Yeah, indeed. All right. So obviously things are changing. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be talking about it in these terms. So what is the new pricing structure and why is everybody so upset?
So the new pricing structure introduces a per install fee once you get to a certain level. It depends a lot on whether you're using the free personal version or the pro versions that you have to pay for initially. But once you hit a certain threshold of success, it starts at $200,000 of revenue and 200,000 installs. Then you have to start paying per install, up to 20 cents per install. Now, this is kind of unique in the industry. There are revenue shares all over the place, Steam, Unreal, like we talked about. Mm-hmm. Paying per install is not really something that's ever been done. Unity says they have this unique algorithm that can track how many times your game is installed without actually using any like privacy invading phone home technologies. But they're being really vague about that, and people are really worried about that. So that's just one side of it. There are a lot of issues, not just with the way they're doing this, but that it's a change. For years, they've been proudly the company that won't nickel and dime you. Right. I think there's a 2015 quote that, there's no royalties. We're completely free. And that's what they've sold themselves on. And now out of nowhere, if you're successful with a Unity game, you could end up paying a lot more than you budgeted for. And this will also apply to games that are currently out. Not previous installs, but future installs of current games, if that makes sense.
What you said makes sense. it doesn't make sense that would be the case.
Right.
But
it's a little hard to understand where they're coming from here, especially for developers that have counted on this structure for years, or might be in the middle of a project that they spent 2-3 years making, and now they're pretty much you can't start over after that. But now you have a big line item for unexpected fees that Unity really gave no indication were coming.
Well, and I mean, you can't start over necessarily, or can you? I mean, there are some, game developers who are saying, and actually credit to John Ashley, who linked me to a kind of a page about Megacrit and Slay the Spire. And they're basically saying we've invested an insane amount of time into this. We chose this platform for a reason. And now, we're kind of facing the reality that if these changes that are about to occur aren't undone, like it sounds like they're basically going to give up on this and change course. And I'm pretty certain like they're not alone in that. Some other developers are probably making pretty drastic decisions as well.
So there's quite a few developers I've heard from who are basically locked into Unity for the time being. They have to finish out, their current project, because to start over again and rebuild from the ground up on a new engine would be too hard. But pretty much universally, everyone I've heard from is saying there is no way we will use Unity for our next project, and we can't recommend anyone else do, because even if you can afford this for a big project, like, if you're selling, I don't know, a $20 game, even a 20-cent install fee is not going to break the bank. What it is, though, is kind of represents a breach of trust, is what the developers are thinking. They went into this with one idea of what Unity was. They were paying a per-site license just for the engine. They figured they could get that. And now, just changing it in midstream, Unity has erased all of that goodwill, and there's no guarantee that they won't change things again in the future. So why would you use an engine like that if you don't have a partner that you don't feel will just take as much money as they can with new rules that they make up later?
Yeah. You know what, either fairly or unfairly comes to mind for me. I can't help but think about Google and as kind of a point of comparison when it comes to trust of a brand. And, year after year, time after time, Google will roll out. And I guess Stadia is a great gaming related example of this. Google puts out this thing to much ballyhoo, within the company. We love this. We're behind it, and they're hoping that everybody's going to buy into it and make it a success. And at some point they deem, as any business has the right to do, they deem that, this thing is not meeting our expectations as a business, as a company. And so it's undone. The downside to that is like what you're saying. It really impacts customer and developer trust in even going in that direction to begin with. I'm really curious to see like the level at which this threatens Unity's position in the gaming market, and if they will undo it. Because I mean, we've seen Google do that, where they're like, okay, wait a minute, maybe we need to do about face. They don't do it very often, but could you see Unity doing that in this case?
Yeah, we'll see. The Stadia situation was a little different, because I think if you bought a Stadia game, I think you had the understanding that, okay, maybe Google will not support this forever, especially if you were paying attention to the industry.
Yes.
With Unity, I feel like if you developed a Unity game, 3 years ago, or started on a game or put out a game, you had this feeling that, okay, Unity for years now, over a decade, has been this royalty-free company. That's their whole thing. They're going to keep that. And then all of a sudden on a random Tuesday, they say, no, now you actually have to pay us starting next year for every install, even on games that were already released. So that's just an even bigger breach of trust than just, getting rid of a product that didn't succeed. What it brings to mind for me, actually, I don't know if you remember at the beginning of the year, Hasbro, the makers of Dungeons and Dragons, tried to change the licensing terms for their products. People who were making modules for the game would have to start paying some ridiculous licensing fee once they started making money. And there was a huge fan outcry about that. There were weeks of, Wizards trying to backtrack, trying to ameliorate things. And finally, they just turned around and said, we're going to totally turn this around. Forget we ever said anything. For Unity, I mean, that could happen. The game development community is that mad. It's very similar in that regard. The difference here is I'm not sure that Unity cares as much about those creators. What this is probably focused on is a few large, free-to-play game makers or companies like Blizzard who have been, using Unity and getting away very cheaply. And they want to get some revenue from those big guys. If that means that some smaller companies can no longer use Unity and are no longer paying, a few site license fees and move on to another engine, they might not care as much if all they really care about is the bottom line.
That's a good point. Yeah, really good point. Somebody in our Discord actually just linked to a story posted yesterday about CEO Riccitiello. Is it Riccitiello? I'm probably mispronouncing his name, but how he sold, around 50,000 shares this year of stock, obviously with this, coming ahead. And I know that you mentioned in pre-show that you've been tracking a lot of the legal kind of ramifications of this. I don't know if you know anything about this particular story or if you've been looking into this, but kind of in your work, really scrutinizing the potential legal aspects of what's your take on where this goes from here?
Yeah, I want to be careful with the insider trading allegations. He's sold stock in the past, and apparently this recent stock sale was a very small part of his holdings. It could be totally coincidental. Maybe he wanted money for a beach house or something. So, I don't want to get into those motivations. Let the SEC do that. Mm-hmm. But as far as the legal issues, it's kind of surprising to people that they're allowed to just change the rules midstream like this, right? If you put out a Unity game in 2019, you read their terms of service and you thought you had, it says, we're not charging fees. And you thought, okay, that's what I'm expecting. And now to turn around and say, no, that game in 2019, now if people install it and it reaches a certain threshold, we are going to charge you. Can they really just change the rules like that? As far as I can tell, I'm still looking at, years of terms of service and updates and such, but it seems like they have a good case that they can. There's the clause in the terms of service that basically says we can, change these fees, we can change these terms whenever we want. There's some conflicting things. There was a thing in 2019 where they said, we will always let you keep the old terms if you don't update the game, but then they got rid of that. So there might be some legal avenue there. It gets very complicated very quickly. And there probably will be some sort of court case over this, if I had to guess, some class action of developers who said, you misrepresented this to us and it's going to cost us money.
Certainly.
I'm not sure how, on the legal route, I'm not sure how successful that will be, but, beyond the legalities, it's really more about trust. When you're in business, these contracts can protect you, but really you're in business with a company that you have to trust will treat you fairly and trust will be a good business partner. Now that they've made this move, I'm not sure a lot of developers are going to feel that way, no matter what the legal contract says.
Yeah, kind of poison the well at this point, as they say. Well, Kyle, always appreciate your work at ours. I love the work that your entire team does, and I love following your reporting. This is a very detailed and scale and scope of this particular story. So thank you for writing it. Thank you for coming on and talk with us about it today, Kyle Orland at Ars Technica. If people want to follow you online, obviously they can find it on the site. If they want to follow you on like the socials, where can they find you?
I'm Kyle ORL on Blue Sky, which is where I do most of my posting. So hopefully you can get an invite.
Yeah, indeed. Right on, Kyle. Thank you so much and keep up the great work. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks. Talk to you later.
All right. Bye.